So, in any case, sorry for the interruption. Socrates is awaiting the death sentence. He is going to die that day. He knows that, all of his friends know it, and this lends an incredibly dramatic tone to what they're discussing, because if you look at the dialogue, you realize that it talks about a lot of things. But one of its most important topics is about the immortality of the soul, and really the question is, is there an afterlife? What happens to us when we die? And can we look forward to anything? Or do we just die and that's it? That's always an important question. And it's a question that all of us have some interest in. But if we are discussing that question on the day in which we know we're going to die, then it has much more immediate importance. So it lends this incredible dramatic tone to the whole thing, because here you have this man who, in a matter of hours or even minutes, is going to be taking the poison. Not really suicide, because this is a way that he's being executed. And his friends are just incredibly upset, as you would imagine, and feel rage at the authorities for having unjustly, they would say, convicted him of corrupting a youth, etc. And sorrow. They're losing their friend. They're losing this man whom they greatly admire. So Phaedo, who was there, begins to tell the story to Echecrates. Echecrates asks there on page 45, "I wish that you would tell me about his death. What did he say in his last hours? We were informed that he died by taking poison, but no one knew anything more." So Phaedo begins to fill him in. And that's the first few pages, first couple of pages. Phaedo tells him who was there, who actually was talking to Socrates on the day of his death and stuff like that. But it's really on page 47 that he really begins to narrate. And after this, it's no longer a dialogue between Phaedo and Echecrates. It's simply a record of what was said and what happened on that day. So, after Socrates begins to talk about things like the connection between pain and pleasure, because he's rubbing his leg where the chain was attached to his leg. You remember, he's a prisoner, and how pain and pleasure seem to be opposites, but they're yoked together. They always come at the same time. Pain follows pleasure. Pleasure follows pain, at least in the form of relief. He says that it's true that he's been writing music, that he's been putting some poems of Aesop to music, following out what he heard in a dream. And that tells you something about the philosophers of that time, is that they considered dreams to have important messages in them. And Socrates was no different from his fellow Greeks at that time, to think that there was a mystical aspect to dreams. And then he says something which really begins the philosophical content part of this dialogue, I would say, the direct philosophical content. And that is that Socrates says that he's not unhappy, that he's actually glad that this day has come, that he feels a certain sense of anticipation. Of what? Of death. Why? Not that he says that we should commit suicide. He says we shouldn't commit suicide because we would be rebelling against the gods. This notion that somehow we belong to the gods, and to commit suicide is to rob them of their property. I don't know how seriously he takes that. Maybe he takes it very seriously. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't. But he says that he tries to be a philosopher, and one of the things that a philosopher should do is to prepare for death, to be in constant preparation for death, and to welcome it when it comes. Why? Let's take it up on page 51. About the middle of the page, Socrates begins to say something. He says, "Then I must try to make a better impression upon you than I did when defending myself before the judges. For I am quite ready to acknowledge, Simmias and Cebes, But I ought to be grieved at death, if I were not persuaded that I am going to other gods who are wise and good. Of this I am as certain as I can be of anything of the sort. And to men departed, though I am not so certain of this, who are better than those whom I leave behind. And therefore I do not grieve as I might have done, for I have good hope that there is yet something remaining for the dead, and, has been said of old, some far better thing for the good than for the evil. That is, Socrates is saying, without any support right now, but saying that in his opinion there probably is an afterlife, and you probably go to a better place if you've lived a good life, and that he has hope, at least. He does qualify it. He says, of this I am as certain as I can be of anything of the sort. That's a really interesting thing to say, because this is a metaphysical question, and we have some notion of what that means now. Right? A metaphysical question is a question that cannot be answered by our usual methods. It's a speculation about something of which we can have no real experience, no direct experience at least. We do not know what happens after death, if anything, in the way that we can know other things. We can have opinions about it, we can argue about it, but we can't really, we can't have it's not a decided matter. So he does qualify that. He hopes that there's an afterlife. He thinks there probably is, and he thinks it's probably a good place, but he can't be absolutely sure. And that's really what the dialogue is all about. And moreover, he says on page 52 that as a philosopher, not only should he be glad that he's going to a better place, but also that as a philosopher, quote, on page 52, that he is ever pursuing death and dying. And having had the desire of death all his life long, should he repine at the arrival of that which he has always been pursuing and desiring? And it's at that point that he really has to explain himself. Why is it that the philosopher in particular would welcome death?